Imagine this traveller an ancient shoreline at dawn, where the tide rolls in over stone shapes that almost look planned, then smooth them back into silence. You didn't arrive here by accident. Something in the deep past has been tugging at your attention, gently, patiently. What if we're not the first too organised to remember to reshape the world, only the latest to leave fingerprints? Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and most of its surface has been rewritten again and again by heat erosion and drifting plates. Somewhere in those layers, a signal could hide like a brief flicker of light in a long cosmic night, an anomaly in carbon, a strange metal trace, a pattern that shouldn't be there. Let's drift a little deeper. Before memory learned how to name things, there was a kind of morning that did not belong to anyone. A pale horizon stretched thin beneath a quiet sky, where stone mist and light met without urgency. Nothing announced itself, nothing asked to be remembered. The world simply existed whole and unobserved, turning slowly beneath the weight of time. Traveller, you're here because some questions do not arrive as thoughts. They arrive as moods, as a feeling that something beneath the surface has been waiting longer than you have been alive. On nights like this, when the edges of the day soften and certainty loosens its grip, curiosity does not demand answers. It sits beside you, patient like an old companion that has learned the value of silence. For most of our lives, we are taught to imagine history as a clean sequence, a straight line marked by dates, discoveries, and familiar names, a ladder that rises steadily toward the present moment toward us. But the Earth does not experience time as a line. It remembers in cycles, in pressure and heat, in folded rock and vanished coastlines. Gravity is its memory. Erosion is time thinking aloud. I've spent long nights alone with instruments humming softly, screens glowing in dark rooms, where even the air feels older than speech. Data scrolls by like distant constellations, patterns forming and dissolving without explanation. Dust gathers on maps that once promised clarity. Coffee cools untouched. Outside, the planet turns indifferent to what we hope to confirm or deny. And in those quiet hours, a question returns with surprising gentleness. What if we are not the first to wonder? Not the first to observe the sky with intention? Not the first to shape matter into meaning? Not the first to leave behind a brief complicated trace before being folded back into the planet's long breath? Earth is not young. It is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and nearly all of that time belongs to something other than us. Continents have collided and torn themselves apart. Oceans have boiled away and returned. Ice has swallowed the world more than once. Each reset was not dramatic in the way stories prefer, but thorough, slow, patient. The surface was rewritten again and again until the past learned how to disappear. We like to imagine ruins lasting forever, stone cities standing intact beneath drifting sands, names carved deeply enough to resist forgetting. But permanence is a human invention. Nature does not recognize it. Wood decays, metal oxidizes, bone dissolves, even mountains surrender grain by grain to wind and water. In geological time, cities are not monuments, they are weather events. Sometimes in moments when the night feels especially wide, I imagine standing at the edge of an ancient plain that no longer exists, watching something intelligent move across it. Not human, not alien, just earlier. Solving problems we would never recognize, thinking thoughts that never needed to be written down, leaving behind no statues, no scripts, no unmistakable scars. If such a civilization existed millions of years ago, what would remain not buildings, not machines, perhaps not even tools, maybe only chemistry slightly out of balance, a thin anomaly in carbon ratios, radiation as a fading whisper, dust as leftover chronology, a signal too quiet to shout, too ordinary to accuse. Science does not reject these ideas because they are fanciful. It sets them aside because evidence is fragile. The deeper you move into time, the softer the record becomes. Layers thin, context disappears, silence expands, and silence is not emptiness. Silence is the universe thinking. There is a particular humility that arrives when you accept how little survives. I have felt it while staring at sediment cores no wider than a wrist, each layer representing thousands of years compressed into something thinner than a breath. Forests lived and died there. Oceans advanced and retreated. Creatures thrived, struggled, vanished. Almost none of it left a name. And yet patterns appear. Not answers. Patterns. Regularities where randomness should dominate. Gaps where continuity is expected. Anomalies that do not announce themselves as important, but refuse to vanish entirely, like ruins frozen not into stone but into probability. This question is not about believing in lost golden ages or forgotten empires. It does not ask for myths to be taken literally, or for speculation to replace rigour. It asks something quieter, something more unsettling. What are the odds that intelligence arises only once on a planet this old? And what are the odds that it always announces itself in ways we know how to recognise? We assume intelligence builds outward, that it accumulates, that it leaves behind structures too large to erase. But that assumption says more about us than about the universe. Awareness might bloom, briefly adapt efficiently, and vanish without ever crossing a threshold we would later define as civilization. Complexity does not guarantee endurance. Tonight the universe whispers again, not loudly, not clearly, just enough to remind us that certainty is rare and humility is earned slowly. Part of a long procession of observers, most unnamed, most unremembered, each holding the same fragile question for a moment before passing it on. The Earth does not keep score. It keeps cycling. And within those cycles, awareness may flicker on and off like light behind thick curtains. Brief, precious, easy to miss. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. At first glance, evidence seems like a simple thing, something solid, something you can point to and say, this mattered, this happened, this remains. But the deeper you move into deep time, the more evidence begins to behave less like an object and more like a suggestion. It softens, it thins, it starts to resemble fog rather than stone. When scientists speak about evidence of the distant past, they are rarely talking about structures or artifacts. They are talking about traces, ratios, distributions, chemical fingerprints pressed gently into layers of rock that were never meant to carry meaning. The Earth does not curate its history. It compresses it, rearranges it, and eventually forgets most of it. In laboratories late at night under fluorescent lights that hum like distant insects, thin slices of sediment are studied as if they were ancient manuscripts. Each band of colour, each change in texture, each subtle shift in composition is a sentence written without intent. Carbon isotopes rise and fall, oxygen ratios drift. Elements appear, vanish, reappear millions of years later without explanation. This is how the planet speaks. Quietly, indirectly, never all at once. The fossil record is often imagined as a gallery of preserved life, but in reality it is closer to a shattered mirror. Most life is never fossilized. It decays, it is eaten, it dissolves. To become a fossil requires a rare alignment of conditions, rapid burial, mineral replacement, protection from erosion, and extraordinary luck. Even then, survival is not guaranteed. Rocks are subducted, layers are eroded, entire chapters are erased. What survives does not represent what mattered most. It represents what resisted destruction long enough to be noticed. This is where the question becomes uncomfortable. If a civilization existed millions of years ago, even one capable of complex thought or coordinated behaviour, its chances of leaving behind recognizable evidence are far lower than we instinctively assume. Especially if it did not build in stone, especially if it did not mine extensively, especially if it lived in regions later drowned, crushed, or recycled into the mantle. We look for evidence in the shapes we understand. Walls, tools, symbols. But intelligence does not require architecture. It does not require metallurgy. It does not require permanence. It requires only continuity, and continuity is fragile. Even our own civilization, for all its density and reach, is already dissolving into the geological background. Metals corrode, plastics fragment, concrete cracks and mineralizes. Given enough time, our cities will not stand as ruins. They will blur into layers, They will become anomalies rather than landmarks. What remains most clearly from our presence is not form but chemistry. Industrial activity alters atmospheres. Agriculture reshapes soil composition. Energy use leaves isotopic signatures. These changes can be global, abrupt, and measurable. They appear as spikes and shifts rather than objects. To a distant future observer, humanity may be visible not as builders, but as a thin line in stone where balance briefly broke. And this is where the idea of prior civilizations quietly re-enters scientific discussion. Not as fantasy, but as method. If intelligence alters environments in predictable ways, then perhaps the search for ancient intelligence should focus not on ruins, but on disruptions, on moments when the planet behaves as if something intervened. Yet even here, certainty dissolves. Volcanoes can mimic industrial emissions. Asteroid impacts can trigger rapid climate change. Methane releases can rewrite carbon records. Nature is capable of violence and imbalance without intention. The planet does not need intelligence to disrupt itself. This is why science proceeds slowly, why anomalies are questioned, tested, retested, and often dismissed. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and most anomalies eventually find natural explanations. But not all explanations feel complete. Some data points remain awkward, sitting uncomfortably between categories labelled unusual, and quietly set aside. I've seen these moments in data sets. Small deviations no one builds a paper around. Leans that almost tell a story, then stop. There is no conspiracy in this, only prioritization. Science moves where clarity accumulates. Ambiguity is patient. It can wait decades. Evidence in deep time is not a verdict. It is a probability cloud. A civilization that burned briefly, lived lightly, and vanished before altering global systems might leave nothing distinguishable at all. No spike, no scar, no unmistakable trace. Its existence would be statistically invisible. And invisibility is not the same as impossibility. We tend to imagine the past as emptier than it was because emptiness is easier to model. But the Earth was alive long before us. Not just biologically, but dynamically. Feedback loops, emergent systems, complex behaviours unfolding without witnesses. Intelligence could have emerged as another transient pattern, rising and falling like so many others. The difficulty is not that evidence does not exist. It is that evidence does not announce what it means. A strange mineral deposit could be natural, or it could be residue. An abrupt climate shift could be volcanic, or it could be something else. Without context, without repetition, without corroboration, evidence does not speak clearly enough to change paradigms, and so we are left with humility. Not resignation, but restraint. Science does not say a previous civilization existed. It says only that the absence of obvious evidence does not fully close the door. It says that our methods are tuned to certain kinds of signals, and that signals outside those expectations may pass unnoticed. Some mysteries wait, others watch. As listeners, as observers, as travellers through inherited time, we stand on a surface that has been erased more often than it has been preserved. We search for certainty in a medium designed for forgetting, and still we look. Not because we expect to find monuments, but because the act of looking teaches us what survival actually means. In the end, traveller evidence is not proof. It is an invitation to caution, to wonder, and to patience. It is all right to not understand. Anomalies are where certainty loosens its grip. They are the places where data hesitates, where patterns bend without breaking, where the familiar rules seem briefly unsure of themselves. In science, anomalies are not celebrated. They are treated cautiously, sometimes quietly, because most of them dissolve under scrutiny. But a few persist not loud enough to overturn understanding, yet stubborn enough to remain. When geologists read the Earth, they expect consistency. Layers form in sequences. Minerals appear where chemistry allows them. Isotopes drift within known bounds. An anomaly is anything that resists these expectations. A composition that does not match its surroundings. A structure too regular to feel accidental. A signal that arrives earlier, later, or stronger than models predict. Most anomalies are eventually explained. Nature is remarkably creative. Pressure can sculpt stone into symmetry. Crystals can grow with machine-like precision. Chemical processes can mimic intention with unsettling accuracy. The planet has had billions of years to practice. What looks deliberate to us is often just patience operating at a scale we're not built to intuit. And yet not all anomalies settle easily. Some remain unresolved not because they are extraordinary, but because they are inconvenient. They sit at the edge of datasets resisting clean classification. They are tagged as outliers, archived, and left to wait for better tools or better questions. Science does not chase every irregularity. It cannot afford to. I have watched anomalies drift through conversations at conferences mentioned briefly then gently released. A slide flashes an unexpected spike. A hand waves it away. Contamination likely. Instrument error perhaps. Reworking of layers. The explanations are reasonable. They are often correct. But the anomaly remains folded quietly into the background. In the context of lost civilizations, anomalies take on a different emotional weight. Not because they suddenly become evidence, but because they mark the boundary of what we know how to interpret. A manufactured object embedded in ancient rock would be extraordinary, but such claims rarely survive scrutiny. More often, anomalies appear as chemistry rather than artifacts. Consider abrupt isotope excursions. Sharp global shifts in carbon or oxygen ratios recorded in thin bands of stone. Many correspond to known events: massive volcanism, methane release, asteroid impact. Others are less clear. They compress rapid warming, ocean acidification and extinction into geological instants that feel uncomfortably familiar. These events do not require intelligence to explain them. Nature is fully capable of catastrophe on its own. But they raise a quieter question. If intelligence ever did reach an industrial scale in the deep past, would its signature look any different from these events? Or would it be indistinguishable, folded into the same category of planetary disruption? The uncomfortable truth is that intelligence leaves no unique fingerprint guaranteed to survive deep time. It leaves patterns, and patterns can be misread. A spike in rare metals could be mining or magma. Synthetic molecules could break down into natural analogues. Even radiation fades. Time is an eraser that does not discriminate. This is why anomalies matter, not as proof, but as reminders of ambiguity. Some of the most cited anomalies in popular culture collapse under examination. Metallic spheres in ancient rock turn out to be natural concretions. Objects in coal seams are usually intrusive artifacts from later periods. Geological processes are messy. Layers shift. Context is easily lost. Confirmation bias fills the gaps. But occasionally something resists complete dismissal. Not artificial, not impossible, just unresolved. A chemical ratio that appears too uniform across continents. A mineral phase that forms under conditions difficult to reconcile with surrounding material. A pattern that feels statistically unlikely but not impossible. These are not smoking guns. They are loose threads. Science is right to be conservative here. The cost of false positives is high. History is filled with examples of overinterpretation. Plate tectonics itself was once fringe, but it succeeded because it unified anomalies rather than leaning on a single one. Evidence accumulated. Patterns aligned. Skepticism yielded to coherence. If a prior civilization existed, its signal would need to do the same. Not a single artifact, not one odd spike, but a constellation of anomalies that align across disciplines: geology, chemistry, climate, biology. Patterns that whisper the same story from different directions, and even then recognition would not be immediate. We are trained to explain unknowns using known mechanisms. This is not arrogance. It is survival. Without that discipline, science dissolves into speculation. But discipline has a side effect. It blinds us to possibilities that fall outside expectation. I think about this often in the quiet hours when data stops flowing and interpretation begins. How many anomalies have we already explained away correctly? Probably most. How many did we explain away because they were easier to ignore than to reframe? That number is harder to estimate. An anomaly does not demand belief. It demands attention. In deep time, attention is rare. The signal-to-noise ratio is brutal. Billions of years compress into centimeters of stone. Events that lasted millennia flatten into lines thinner than a fingernail. distinguishing intention from coincidence becomes nearly impossible. This is why the idea of a human civilization remains speculative, not because it violates physics, but because it inhabits a region where evidence is weakest and interpretation is softest. It is a question balanced on the edge of what the Earth allows us to know. Anomalies are not answers, they are reminders that the record is incomplete, that the absence of clarity is not always the presence of certainty. They whisper that our story may not be the first chapter written in this medium, only the most recent one we can still read. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. And in observing anomalies without forcing them into narratives, we practice a rare kind of patience. The kind that accepts uncertainty without fear. The kind that understands that not knowing is not failure but honesty. In the end, traveller anomalies do not tell us that something came before. They tell us something more subtle, that the Earth remembers imperfectly, that time edits aggressively, and that whatever intelligence arises here does so briefly, leaving behind traces that may never be loud enough to announce themselves. Tonight the universe whispers again. Silence is not the absence of information. It is the shape information takes after time has finished with it. When we look into the deep past and find nothing that clearly speaks back, it is tempting to assume nothing was ever there. But silence, especially on a planet as active as Earth, is rarely empty. It is layered, processed, filtered through forces that do not care about memory. Archaeology ends where context dissolves. Geology begins where meaning thins. Between them lies a long, quiet stretch, where events may have occurred without leaving signatures we can still recognize. This is not a failure of method, it's a property of time. The farther back we look, the less the planet resembles an archive, and the more it behaves like a machine designed to recycle everything it touches. Oceans erase without malice. Cities do not sink intact and wait politely to be discovered. They dissolve. They scatter. Stone becomes sediment. Metal becomes ions. Organic matter feeds ecosystems and then vanishes. Water circulates endlessly, carrying fragments of once coherent structures into chemical gradients and biological loops. The sea is not storage. It is a processor. Even if traces persist, briefly, distinguishing their origin becomes guesswork. An isotope anomaly does not come labelled. A shifted sediment layer does not explain itself. Unless a civilization vanishes while we are watching its passing, becomes indistinguishable from background processes. The planet absorbs it, distributes it, and moves on. Silence, then, is what remains when complexity loses coherence. I've often felt this silence most strongly not in the field, but in the lab staring at samples that look disappointingly ordinary. Soil, rock, dust, nothing dramatic. And yet each grain carries history compressed beyond recognition. What once may have been a forest, a shoreline, or a settlement is now indistinct matter, patiently refusing to tell its story. We expect importance to announce itself, to leave behind monuments or scars. But importance is not a geological category. The Earth does not rank events by meaning. It ranks them by durability, and durability favours the simple, the repetitive, the chemically stable. Most of what matters to living beings does not qualify. This is why silence dominates the deep record. Not because nothing happened, but because most things cannot last long enough to be heard. Soil is especially deceptive. It feels solid underfoot, but it is one of the most transient layers of the planet. It is constantly reworked by roots, microbes, insects, water, and wind. It records what grew, what burned, what decayed, but only briefly. Without rapid burial or unusual conditions, soil forgets quickly. Even when human activity leaves clear marks, hearths paths enriched earth, those signals fade within thousands of years. Add a few million more, and the distinction between intention and accident collapses entirely. A fire pit becomes a lightning scar. A cultivated plot becomes a meadow. Activity and coincidence merge. This is why the idea of a lost civilization confronts us not with evidence, but with absence, with gaps so large they feel intentional. But absence does not accuse. It only humbles. Consider how much of our own civilization would survive if humanity vanished tomorrow. Buildings would crumble within decades. Roads would fracture. Cities would flood or be reclaimed by vegetation. In a few thousand years, most surface traces would be ambiguous. In a million, almost nothing recognizable would remain. What would persist are not stories or structures, but chemistry. Carbon ratios, plastic fragments, altered nitrogen cycles, thin global markers compressed into narrow bands of stone, signals without context, evidence without explanation. If this is the fate of our civilization, it is reasonable to ask why earlier ones, if they existed, would fare any better, especially if they lived lightly, especially if they avoided large-scale extraction, especially if they valued continuity over expansion. Silence may not mean failure, it may mean restraint. There is a quiet discomfort in that idea. We are conditioned to equate advancement with footprint, with visible transformation, with dominance over environment. But those are cultural choices, not inevitabilities. A society could reach sophistication without leaving scars deep enough to last. And if such a society vanished, the earth would not mourn. It would continue cycling, rivers would shift, forests would grow, new life would adapt. Silence would settle not as punishment, but as process. This silence does something to us when we sit with it long enough. It dissolves the illusion of permanence. It reframes intelligence as a temporary condition rather than a destiny. It reminds us that awareness may be rare not because it never happens, but because it never lasts. When archaeology runs out of artifacts and geology runs out of layers, what remains is uncertainty. Not the dramatic kind that fuels speculation, but the quiet kind that invites patience. The kind that asks us to accept that some chapters of planetary history may never be readable again. This is not a loss, it is a boundary. Silence is where humility begins. It is where we stop projecting ourselves backward and allow the past to remain unresolved. Not every mystery is an invitation to solve. Some are invitations to listen. And when we listen closely, silence does not feel empty. It feels full of compressed possibility, of lives lived and forgotten, of patterns that rose and fell without witnesses, of intelligence that may have flickered briefly and then dissolved into the same dust that now carries us. Some mysteries wait, others watch. In the end, traveller silence does not tell us that nothing was there. It tells us that the earth is very good at forgetting, and that if something came before us, its greatest legacy may not be what it built, but how completely it was absorbed. It is all right to not understand. A forgotten epoch is not marked by ruins or dates, it is marked by the smoothness of what remains. When an era passes without leaving sharp edges, without structures that resist erosion, it blends into the long continuity of stone and sediment. From a distance it looks like nothing happened. Up close it feels like something was gently erased. Geology does not remember events the way minds do. It remembers pressure, temperature, chemistry, repetition. An epoch is not defined by who lived in it, but by how the planet behaved while they were alive. If an intelligent culture once existed and did not push the planet far from its usual rhythms, then its entire history could be reduced to a faint modulation, a whisper buried beneath louder cycles. This is where the idea of a forgotten epoch becomes unsettling. Not because it implies catastrophe, but because it suggests normality. A civilization that rose adapted and faded without triggering mass extinction or global scars would leave almost nothing behind. Its presence would be folded into background variation, indistinguishable from slow climate shifts or biological turnovers. We often imagine lost civilizations as dramatic, towering cities, sudden collapse, fire and flood. But that expectation is shaped by our own fears. The planet does not require drama to forget. Time alone is enough. There are entire stretches of Earth's history we describe only in broad strokes, hundreds of millions of years summarized by a few mineral signatures and fossil trends. Within those vast intervals, countless ecosystems lived and vanished. Species emerged, flourished, and disappeared without ever becoming names. If intelligence arose among them even briefly, its chances of being recorded were no better. The fossil record already tells us that survival is rare. Not survival of life, but survival of evidence. Most organisms never fossilize. Most landscapes never preserve their shapes. Most actions never leave marks durable enough to persist. Intelligence does not grant immunity from this. It may even reduce it if that intelligence favours flexibility over monument. A forgotten epoch would not announce itself with a boundary line. It would slip between layers. Its technologies, if any, would degrade into common elements. Its dwellings would rot, burn, or be recycled. Its languages would vanish the moment their speakers did. Within a few thousand years, its memory would exist nowhere but in minds that no longer existed, and then even those minds would be gone. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how much of our own time will look like this. How the details we consider essential will compress into generalities. How our conflicts, discoveries, and achievements will blur into a single chemical pulse in the rock. The forgotten epoch is not hypothetical. It is the default outcome. What makes an epoch remembered is not significance, but resistance. Ice cores preserve air. Amber preserves insects. Rapid burial preserves bone. Without these rare conditions, the past dissolves into continuity. A civilization that never aligned with such preservation pathways would be invisible by design, not intention, but outcome. This reframes the question of whether we were the first. The real question becomes whether firstness even matters in deep time. The planet does not count attempts. It does not care about precedents. It only responds to forces that exceed thresholds. Everything else is smoothed out. A forgotten epoch might have contained knowledge, curiosity, even self-awareness. But unless that awareness reshaped atmospheric chemistry, altered sedimentation globally, or left durable artifacts in stable environments, it would not register. Intelligence without impact leaves no fossil. An impact, as we are learning, is a double-edged signal. It is how a civilization becomes visible, but also how it becomes vulnerable. The more forcefully a society reshapes its world, the louder it speaks in the geological record and the more likely it is to destabilize itself. Perhaps that is why forgotten epochs feel plausible. Not as failures, but as experiments that chose restraint. Or that never reached a scale where restraint was no longer an option. The planet has hosted long periods of relative stability punctuated by abrupt resets, ice ages, volcanic winters, impact events. In between, life adapted quietly. If intelligence emerged during one of these calm intervals and remained embedded within ecosystems rather than above them, it might never have crossed the threshold of detectability. We would not find their cities because they may never have built them. We would not find their tools because they may have decayed alongside their makers. We would not find their stories because stories do not fossilize. All we would find is continuity, and continuity is easy to misread as emptiness. There is a certain humility that comes with accepting this. It loosens the grip of exceptionalism. It reminds us that awareness is not guaranteed to persist, and that the universe does not archive experiences simply because they felt meaningful at the time. A forgotten epoch does not accuse us of ignorance. It invites us into patience, into the understanding that some truths are not lost because we fail to look hard enough, but because the medium of the planet cannot hold them. When we search the past, we are not just looking for others. We are learning how we ourselves will disappear. The forgotten epoch is a mirror stretched across time, reflecting our likely fate, back at us without judgment. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. If intelligence has arisen before and faded without trace, then its silence is not evidence of insignificance. It is evidence of how thoroughly the Earth integrates everything into itself. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is preserved out of sentiment. Everything becomes material for the next pattern. And so, traveller, when we speak of forgotten epochs, we are not speaking of loss alone. We are speaking of transformation, of memory converted into matter, of thought returned to chemistry, of awareness folded back into the systems that made it possible in the first place. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Some epochs do not want to be remembered. They want to rest. A reset is not an ending, it is a quiet return to baseline. In planetary terms, a reset is what happens when complexity grows faster than stability can support it, when systems become brittle, and the Earth responds not with intent but with physics. Heat moves, plates shift, orbits wobble, energy is released, and whatever cannot bend breaks. From the perspective of deep time, resets are ordinary. They are not punishments. They are not judgments. They are the planet doing what it has always done to remain dynamic. Ice ages advance and retreat. Seas rise and fall. Volcanoes breathe sulfur into the sky. Asteroids cross paths with worlds that happen to be there. Life adapts, or it doesn't. What we call catastrophe is simply scale intersecting with vulnerability. If a civilization existed before us, its greatest challenge would not have been enemies or exhaustion, but alignment. Alignment with climate cycles, with resource limits, with the slow but relentless movements of the planet itself. No intelligence, no matter how refined, is exempt from orbital mechanics or thermodynamics. A reset does not announce itself with trumpets. It begins subtly. A shift in rainfall, a cooling current, a growing mismatch between expectation and reality. Crops fail where they used to thrive. Migrations accelerate. Systems built for stability strain under variability. Long before collapse is visible, resilience has already been spent. Geological resets are patient. They give warning in the language of trends, rising isotopes, altered sediment flow, changing magnetic fields. But these warnings are not readable without instruments, and even with instruments they're easy to underestimate. The Earth whispers before it moves. Then sometimes it moves all at once. The fossil record is punctuated by these moments. Thin layers rich in iridium, sudden absences of once common species, sharp boundaries between before and after. To us they look dramatic. To the planet they are maintenance events. A reset does not erase everything equally, it selects. Organisms with certain traits survive. Structures in certain environments persist. Information encoded in DNA may pass through, while knowledge encoded in culture disappears entirely. Memory is filtered. This is why resets are so effective at erasing civilizations. Culture is fragile. It depends on continuity, on transmission, on shared understanding. When populations fragment or vanish, knowledge collapses faster than infrastructure. Tools rust slowly. Stories vanish overnight. If a pre-human civilization experienced a reset, its technological phase might have lasted only a geological instant. A few thousand years of complexity compressed into a sediment layer thinner than a fingernail. Without repeated reinforcement, without global reach, that signal would fade. And resets do not require apocalypse. A slow climate drift can be just as final as an impact. A prolonged drought can dismantle societies more thoroughly than fire. The Earth does not need spectacle to reset its surface. Time and imbalance are enough. There is a tendency to imagine resets as failures of intelligence, but that assumes intelligence exists to conquer environment rather than to negotiate with it. A civilization that collapses is not necessarily foolish. It may simply be constrained. Even now we live within narrow tolerances, atmospheric composition, temperature ranges, ocean chemistry, soil fertility. These are not guarantees, they are conditions that can change. The difference between survival and erasure often comes down to scale. Small populations leave small traces. Distributed cultures vanish quietly. Centralized systems fall loudly but briefly. Either way, the long-term outcome is similar. Reset smooths. From space after enough time, all resets look the same. I imagine a time long ago when instruments went silent, not dramatically, just one by one, a sensor left unmaintained, a structure exposed to cycles it wasn't designed for, a data archive lost to moisture or decay. The knowledge did not explode. It thinned, it scattered, it forgot itself, and then the planet continued. Sediment-covered foundations, roots split stone, microbes metabolized alloys into oxides, rivers changed course. The reset was complete, not when the last mind went dark, but when the last trace became indistinguishable from its surroundings. This is the power of reset. It does not destroy meaning, it dissolves context. What remains afterward is not absence, but a new beginning layered on top of an old one. Life returns, but it does not remember. Ecosystems rebuild, but they do not inherit intention. Whatever intelligence emerges next starts from chemistry, not from legacy. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect. Resets do not carry lessons forward. They do not archive warnings. Each intelligence faces the planet as if for the first time. We sometimes speak of learning from history. The Earth does not. It repeats patterns because patterns are stable, not because they are wise. Gravity does not remember collapse. Climate does not recall excess. The reset resets everything except the laws that caused it. If there was a civilization before us, it likely faced this same truth. Its achievements mattered deeply to those who lived them, but when the reset came, whether sudden or slow meaning did not survive, unless it had been encoded into something the planet could not easily erase. And very few things qualify. This realization changes how we should think about the past. Not as a linear story with chapters, but as overlapping waves. Rises and falls that do not reference each other. Intelligence appearing not as a destiny, but as a phase. Some phases leave marks, others do not. In the end, Traveller, the Reset is not cruel. It is impartial. It treats all structures as temporary, all arrangements as provisional. It does not target civilizations. It simply outlasts them. And there is a strange comfort in that. A sense that failure is not personal and success is not permanent. That what matters in a given moment does not need to endure forever to have been real. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again not of doom, but of cycles, of endings that are also beginnings, of resets that clear the stage without applause, making room for whatever comes next. It's all right to not understand. An echo is not a voice. It is what remains after the voice has passed, a distortion shaped by distance, by medium, by time. In deep history, echoes are all we ever receive. Not messages, not records, but softened repetitions of something that once moved through matter and then vanished. If a civilization existed before us, its presence would not reach us intact. It would arrive as an echo, faint and altered, stripped of intention. The Earth does not transmit meaning, it transmits residue. Pressure remembers force. Chemistry remembers imbalance. Sediment remembers disruption. Nothing remembers thought. This is why the search for earlier intelligence feels so frustrating. We are listening for words in a language that no longer exists, carried through a medium that was never designed to preserve them. The echo we receive is always incomplete, always ambiguous, always capable of being mistaken for noise. Most echoes fade quickly. A footprint fills with dust. A structure collapses into rubble. A tool corrodes into ore. But some echoes linger longer than expected. A strange ratio of isotopes. An unusual clustering of elements. A pattern in extinction that feels too abrupt, too synchronized. These are not statements. They are hesitations in the geological record. An echo does not point clearly to its source. It only tells us that something once disturbed the silence. When scientists examine ancient layers of rock, they are not reading history in sentences. They are scanning for irregularities, a curve that bends too sharply, a spike that rises too fast, a composition that resists easy explanation. Most of the time, these echoes resolve into natural causes: volcanism, orbital shifts, biological feedback loops. The planet is capable of astonishing complexity without intention, but complexity can also hide intention. The difficulty lies in separation. How do you tell the difference between a system that reorganized itself and one that was reorganized by intelligence? In deep time, both leave similar scars. Both alter flows. Both disrupt equilibrium. Both settle back into new baselines. An echo of intelligence would not announce itself as such. It would masquerade as geology. I imagine a scientist long before us kneeling over a core sample under dim light, noticing a thin, dark band that does not belong. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to slow the hand to invite a second look. The echo does not say what it was, only that something changed faster than expected. That is how echoes work. They do not convince. They invite doubt. We already live surrounded by echoes of our own making. Carbon released centuries ago still warms the air. Nitrogen fixed into soil continues to alter ecosystems. Plastic fragments drift through oceans long after their makers forgot them. These are not messages we intended to send. They are echoes we cannot take back. In millions of years, if any observers exist, these signals may be all that remains of us. A brief distortion in planetary chemistry. A line in the sediment marking imbalance followed by recovery. No names, no stories, just evidence that something once pushed the system out of its usual rhythm. If we imagine an earlier civilization, its echo would be even fainter. Time attenuates everything. Signals spread, boundaries blur, layers are folded, eroded, subducted. The echo might survive only where conditions were unusually stable, a deep ocean basin, an ancient craton, a sealed mineral lattice. Even then, recognition is not guaranteed. An echo requires an ear trained to hear it. Without context, without expectation, even a real signal can be dismissed. This has happened before. Continental drift was once an echo ignored. Meteor impact as an extinction driver was once noise. The data existed, but the framework to hear it did not. Echoes are only meaningful when someone learns how to listen. This is why the question of earlier civilizations is as much about us as it is about them. It tests our assumptions about what intelligence should look like, how it should behave, what kind of mark it should leave. We expect symmetry, purpose, design. But the deeper we look, the more the universe reminds us that outcomes rarely reflect intentions. A civilization may have existed that never built monuments, never mined deeply, never altered the atmosphere enough to leave a global scar. Its echo would be local, subtle, easily erased, or it may have burned brightly and briefly, leaving a sharp but narrow signal that we now misclassify as a natural anomaly. Either way, the echo would not arrive labelled. Sometimes when I sit alone with old data late at night, the lab quiet except for the hum of instruments, I feel this distance acutely. We reduce deep time to charts and curves, but beneath them is a silence that feels intentional, as if the past is not hiding but resting. The echo is there, but it does not rush to explain itself. This is not a failure of science, it is a boundary. Science excels at patterns. Echoes are fragments of patterns without repetition. A single event compressed into layers that no longer align cleanly. Without multiple instances, without comparison, certainty remains out of reach. And yet echoes matter. They remind us that absence is not emptiness, that silence can still carry structure, that the past is not obligated to be legible. If intelligence arose before and vanished, its echo would not be a warning or a lesson. It would simply be a fact of the universe as morally neutral as a supernova or a glacier. Meaning is something we add afterward. Perhaps the most honest way to approach echoes is without expectation, not asking what they prove, but what they allow. They allow humility, they allow patience, they allow us to accept that not all questions resolve into answers. In the end, traveller and echo is enough to unsettle certainty, but not enough to replace it with belief. It sits between knowing and imagining, a reminder that the universe has more history than it shares, and that some chapters were never meant to be read aloud. Tonight the universe whispers again, universe, and the echo fades before it finishes speaking. A pattern is what remains when chance repeats itself often enough to look intentional. In science, patterns are how we learn to listen to a universe that does not speak in explanations. In deep time, they are the only language we have. Lines in rock, cycles in climate, ratios that return again and again, as if memory were embedded not in minds but in a matter itself. When we search for earlier civilizations, we are not truly searching for ruins. We are searching for patterns that refuse to behave like nature alone. Not miracles, not impossibilities, just arrangements that repeat with a precision that feels slightly out of place, like a rhythm that doesn't quite belong to the song around it. The Earth is full of patterns already. Orbital cycles drive ice ages. Plate tectonics redraw continents. Carbon moves between sky, sea and stone in vast, slow loops. Life rises, diversifies, collapses and rises again. These patterns are powerful because they persist. They do not require intention. They require only time. This is what makes the idea of a technological pattern so difficult to isolate. Intelligence does not replace natural cycles. It overlays them. It bends flows slightly. It accelerates processes that would otherwise move slowly. It concentrates materials where they would normally be diffuse. And then when it disappears, those distortions begin to relax back toward equilibrium. A pattern left by intelligence would not shout. It would lean. It might appear as a sudden spike followed by a gradual decay. A sharp deviation smoothed out over millions of years, a brief interruption in a long stable trend. Without repetition it would be indistinguishable from anomaly. With repetition it might begin to suggest design. But repetition requires time, and time erases the very conditions needed to recognize it. This is the paradox. To be visible, a pattern must be strong. To persist, it must be gentle. Civilizations tend to be neither. We often imagine progress as linear, but the planet does not. It recognizes only cycles. Even mass extinctions which feel catastrophic to us are part of a repeating structure. Life rebounds, niches refill, complexity returns in new forms. The pattern does not remember who was lost. If intelligence has arisen before it, likely did so within this same framework. It would have been constrained by energy flows, by ecological limits, by the slow feedback loops of climate and geology. Its growth would have followed curves we recognize. Its decline would have mirrored collapses we have already mapped. This suggests something unsettling. If earlier civilizations existed, they may not stand out because they behave too much like us. Our own civilization is already forming a pattern: rapid energy extraction, atmospheric alteration, biodiversity loss, a sharp deviation from long-term baselines. In the geological record, this will appear not as a story but as a shape. A narrow peak, a sudden bend, a disturbance followed by recovery or replacement. Seen from far enough away in time, our uniqueness collapses into familiarity. I think about this often when examining long data sets late at night, when graphs stretch across millions of years, and human history is reduced to a barely visible blip. The temptation is always to zoom in to insist that the present matters more because we are in it. But the pattern does not care where we are standing. Patterns are indifferent to perspective. If an earlier intelligence followed a similar arc, its signal may already be catalogued, filed under natural variability, explained as a volcanism, methane release orbital forcing. Not because scientists are careless, but because without independent confirmation, the simplest explanation always wins. Patterns must be unmistakable to be reclassified, and unmistakable patterns are rare. The Earth is exceptionally good at hiding repetition by folding it into noise. Layers are compressed, signals overlap. Older events are overwritten by newer ones. Even when patterns survive, they may be incomplete. Half a curve, a truncated cycle, enough to suggest motion, not enough to define it. This is why the search for earlier civilizations feels like staring at clouds always on the edge of recognition. The shapes are there, but they do not hold still long enough to name. There is also the possibility that we misunderstand what a technological pattern looks like. We assume it involves industry combustion extraction, but intelligence does not require smoke. A society could alter ecosystems without altering chemistry globally. It could shape evolution through selective pressure without leaving clear tools. It could encode knowledge in behaviors that leave no durable trace. Such a civilization would leave patterns only in absence, species distributions that do not make sense, sudden shifts in genetic diversity, landscapes stabilized or destabilized in unusual ways. These are difficult to attribute even when recent. Over deep time they blur into background evolution, and yet patterns are still our best hope. Not for proof, but for humility. They remind us that intelligence may not be a singular event, that the rise of awareness could be a recurring phase in planetary development, emerging when conditions allow and fading when they do not. Not destiny, not accident, pattern. If this is true, then our question changes. It is no longer were we first, but how often does this happen, and how quietly does it end? The universe favors repetition. Stars form and die. Galaxies collide. Chemistry assembles itself into life wherever conditions permit. It would be strange if intelligence were exempt from this tendency. Stranger still if it always announced itself loudly enough to be remembered. Perhaps the reason we do not see clear evidence of earlier civilizations is not because they were rare, but because their patterns were familiar. Too familiar to stand out against the immense backdrop of natural change. In the end, traveller, a pattern does not need to be decoded to be respected. It only needs to be acknowledged. That the Earth has rhythms older than memory. That intelligence may be one of them. And that silence does not mean absence, only integration. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again, tracing its pattern slowly, patiently, as it always has, whether anyone is listening or not. A warning is not a prediction. It is a pattern recognized just early enough to feel uncomfortable. In science, warnings rarely arrive as alarms. They arrive as trends, as slow curves that tilt in directions we wish they wouldn't. By the time they become obvious, they have already been true for a long time. If earlier civilizations existed, the most meaningful thing they could offer us would not be proof of their presence, but the shape of their ending. Not a moral lesson, not a mythic collapse, but a structural outcome. The warning, if it exists at all, would be encoded in how systems fail when complexity outruns resilience. The Earth does not warn with words, it warns with lag. Temperature rises trail emissions, sea levels trail melting ice, extinction trails habitat loss. By the time effects are undeniable, causes are already embedded deep in the past. This delay is not a flaw, it is a property of large systems, and it is what makes warnings so easy to ignore. I sometimes imagine an earlier intelligence watching its own data accumulate. Long nights spent measuring small changes that felt abstract, slight shifts in climate averages, gradual resource depletion, signals that required patience and trust in models, rather than trust in instinct. The danger would not have been ignorance. It would have been familiarity. When change happens slowly, it feels manageable right up until it isn't. A civilization does not need to be reckless to fall. It only needs to be precise in the wrong way, optimized for efficiency instead of adaptability, designed for stability instead of variance, built on assumptions that hold until they don't. This is what makes warnings so subtle in the geological record. Collapse does not always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like normal operation pushed a little too far. The planet records these moments as transitions, a sudden drop in biodiversity, a shift in sedimentation rates, a chemical imbalance followed by a long recovery. From far enough away it looks clean, before, during, after. The struggle in between is invisible. If an earlier civilization encountered such a warning and failed to respond in time, its disappearance would not look dramatic in deep time. It would look like a phase change, one regime giving way to another. A complexity replaced by simplicity. Energy throughput reduced. Life reorganizing itself without reference to what came before. The warning then is not preserved as an event, it is preserved as an outcome. This challenges how we think about learning from the past. We expect warnings to be explicit, flood myths, fire from the sky, sudden endings. But the most dangerous warnings are the ones that feel boring while they are happening. Gradual trends rarely inspire urgency, they inspire debate. Even now we argue over slopes and uncertainties, over models and margins of error. This is rational, it is also risky. Large systems do not wait for consensus. If an earlier civilization reached a similar point, it may have faced the same dilemma. Act decisively on incomplete information, or wait for clarity and risk irreversibility. Neither choice feels safe. One risks overreaction, the other risks silence. The geological record suggests that silence often wins. Warnings that are heeded leave fewer traces. A society that adapts early may never push the planet far enough to register as a disturbance. Its success would look like absence. Its restraint would erase its memory. This is a strange inversion. The civilizations most likely to be detected in deep time are the ones that failed loudly, the ones that altered chemistry, climate, or biodiversity at scale, the ones that crossed thresholds and triggered resets. Survival, paradoxically, is quieter. If this is true, then the absence of evidence for earlier civilizations may not mean they never existed. It may mean that any which learned to listen vanished gently, leaving nothing for us to find. The warning then is not carved into stone. It is implied by the silence. When I think about this late at night, surrounded by instruments and old data sets, the lab lights low, I feel a kind of calm dread. Not fear, but clarity. The realization that intelligence does not guarantee endurance. That awareness does not exempt a species from the rules of complex systems. We often ask whether we are smart enough to avoid collapse. The better question may be whether we are patient enough to recognize warnings that do not feel urgent. A planet can absorb a great deal of disturbance, but absorption is not forgiveness. It is storage, and stored imbalance eventually moves. If there was a civilization before us, its warning is not directed at us personally. It is not a message sent forward in time. It is simply the demonstration that intelligence is a phase, not a destination, a condition that arises under certain constraints and disappears when those constraints shift. This is not pessimism. It is realism, scaled to billions of years. The Earth does not care whether we succeed or fail, but it will respond to what we do. That response will be measured consistent and indifferent to intention. The warning is built into the response itself. In this way, the idea of a prior civilization becomes less about mystery and more about perspective. It reminds us that what feels unprecedented from the inside often looks familiar from the outside. That collapse is rarely a surprise to the system experiencing it, only to those living within it. If we listen carefully, the warning's already present. Not in prophecies or myths, but in curves bending the wrong way, in thresholds approaching quietly, in feedback loops tightening. But listening requires humility, the willingness to accept that being first would not protect us, and being aware may not save us. In the end, traveller, a warning does not demand fear. It invites attention, to slow down, to notice patterns before they harden into outcomes, to accept that some questions about the past exist not to be answered, but to reframe how we live in the present. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again, not loudly, not urgently, but steadily, repeating the same lesson it has always offered to anything that learns to listen. The sky is the oldest archive we have that never touched the earth. Long before stone learned how to hold memory, light was already travelling, carrying information across distances that make history feel small. When we look upward, we are not just observing space. We are looking into time that never had a surface to erase it. For any civilization, the sky is the first mirror. It reflects limits and possibilities at once. It offers patterns that repeat with patient precision, stars returning to their places, planets tracing loops that feel intentional long before intention is understood. The sky teaches regularity. It also teaches scale. No matter how advanced a culture becomes, the sky remains larger, quieter, and indifferent. If an earlier civilization existed, it too would have looked up, not necessarily with telescopes or mathematics, but with curiosity. The sky is difficult to ignore. It governs seasons, tides, migrations, climate rhythms. Even without understanding physics, a society would feel its influence. Awareness of the sky does not require technology. It requires attention. This is why the sky matters in the question of forgotten civilizations. Unlike cities or tools, the sky does not decay. Its record is not written in fragile matter but in motion. Orbits remember, radiation persists. Light continues long after its source is gone. In some ways, the sky is the only place where time truly accumulates without interruption. A civilization that rose and fell on Earth would not leave its story written among the stars. But it might leave its timing there. Subtle correlations. Alignments that once mattered to minds now absent. Structures oriented toward solstices. Calendars synchronized with planetary cycles. These traces would not be messages but coincidences layered on top of natural regularity. We often imagine ancient peoples building toward the sky as a form of worship. But it may be more accurate to think of it as calibration. The sky is the most reliable reference frame available to any intelligence. Ground shifts, rivers move, forests grow and die, the stars return. If a pre-human civilization existed, its relationship with the sky may have been one of the few aspects of its culture that left any trace at all, not because they tried to preserve it, but because celestial mechanics are stable enough to remember interactions long after ground-based evidence is gone. And yet even the sky forgets in its own way. Stars drift. Galaxies rotate. The constellations we recognize are temporary arrangements. Given enough time, even the sky becomes unrecognizable. A civilization that mapped it millions of years ago would see a different heavens than we do now. Their reference points would have shifted beyond recognition. This complicates the idea of cosmic memory. Even light does not preserve meaning forever. It stretches, it reddens, it disperses. The universe records events faithfully, but interpretation degrades with distance. I sometimes think about the possibility that an earlier intelligence sent signals upward not to communicate but simply to understand. Radio emissions, reflected light, heat signatures. These would travel outward, thinning, blending into background noise. Long after the civilization vanished, its presence might still be moving through space as an undetectable ripple. But detection requires proximity, and we are late. By the time we learned how to listen, the sky had already absorbed billions of years of signals. The chance that we would notice one brief whisper from our own planet's deep past is vanishingly small. The universe does not privilege origin stories, it only carries energy forward. This makes the sky both comforting and humbling. It suggests that intelligence may not be as rare as we think, but also that it is rarely preserved in ways that allow recognition. Awareness may flicker in many places many times, leaving behind nothing but altered trajectories and faint radiation. From this perspective, Earth may not be unique. It may simply be one of many worlds where intelligence briefly aligns with conditions, looks up wonders, and then disappears back into chemistry. The sky does not keep a list. When we search for extraterrestrial intelligence, we often assume we are looking outward. But in doing so, we are also confronting the possibility that others looked outward before us and found the same silence. The sky reflects our questions without answering them. If there was a civilization before us, it may have concluded the same thing we're beginning to understand, that the universe is vast quiet and not arranged for conversation. That meaning is local, that survival depends more on planetary negotiation than cosmic expansion. This does not mean they failed, it means they stayed grounded. The sky can inspire ambition, but it can also inspire restraint. To see how much exists beyond reach is to understand how small any one moment truly is. A civilization that internalized this may have chosen depth over expansion, observation over extraction, alignment over growth. Such choices would not leave obvious scars. They would leave balance, and balance is almost impossible to detect after millions of years. When I think of the sky late at night when instruments are quiet and the air feels older than language, I'm struck by how little it cares about sequence. Stars do not ask who came first. Orbits do not mark ownership. Light does not remember who watched it. The sky treats all observers the same. It gives patterns freely and takes nothing in return. Perhaps that is why the sky is the right place to look when considering lost civilizations. Not for proof, but for perspective. It reminds us that intelligence is not the center of the story. It is a brief alignment between matter and awareness happening wherever conditions allow. If someone came before us, they stood under a different sky but felt the same vastness. Their questions may have echoed ours. Their silence now matches the silence we hear when we look outward. In the end, traveller, the sky does not answer whether we were the first. It dissolves the importance of the question itself. It suggests that what matters is not precedence, but presence. Not who arrived earliest, but who is listening now. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not from the ground beneath us, but from the dark above where time stretches thin, and every civilization past or future becomes just another moment of looking up. The Earth is not a backdrop. It is the main character that never learned how to speak in words. Everything that has ever lived here has existed inside its patience, borrowing stability for a moment before returning it altered. When we ask whether another civilization came before us, we are really asking what the Earth allows to persist and what it quietly absorbs back into itself. From a human perspective, the planet feels solid. Ground beneath our feet, mountains that seem eternal, continents outlined cleanly on maps. But this solidity is an illusion created by short lifespans. To the Earth, solidity is temporary. Rock flows given enough time, plates drift, oceans open and close. What we call land is just a slow wave passing through deep emotion. Any civilization, no matter how advanced, must negotiate with this movement. Cities are built on faults that will eventually slip. Fields are planted on soils that will erode. Waterways shift. Climate oscillates. The Earth does not oppose civilization, but it does not accommodate permanence. It offers windows, not guarantees. If an earlier civilization existed, it would have lived entirely within these constraints. It would have drawn energy from the same gradients, heat, chemical differences, sunlight, gravity. It would have built atop materials already scheduled for transformation. In the long view, its story would not stand apart from the planet's processes. It would be one expression of them. This is why Earth is such an effective eraser. Not because it destroys deliberately, but because it recycles relentlessly. Organic matter decays, metals oxidize, structures fracture along stress lines. Even the most durable constructions are eventually broken down into components that no longer announce their origin. What remains after millions of years is not intention, but equilibrium. When geologists read the Earth, they are not looking for narratives, they are looking for balance sheets. Inputs and outputs, energy in, energy out, sediment deposited, sediment removed. Life expands, life contracts. The Earth keeps track of totals, not authors. A civilization that lived lightly would barely register. A civilization that lived intensely would register briefly, then fade. Either way, the Earth would not mark the difference in a way that preserves meaning. It would simply continue adjusting. There is something deeply unsettling and deeply calming about this. It strips away the idea that importance guarantees memory. It suggests that what matters locally does not have to matter forever to be real. The Earth does not validate experience by preserving it. Experience validates itself by happening. I often think about how many layers of ground I've walked over without knowing what passed beneath them. Ancient forests, shallow seas, ice sheets, countless lives compressed into stone beneath asphalt and soil. The Earth does not hide these things, it incorporates them. If intelligence arose before us, its bones, tools and cities would now be part of this incorporation. Calcium redistributed, metals diffused, carbon cycled. The Earth would not remember them as intelligence, it would remember them as chemistry. This reframes loss. What we call disappearance is from the planet's perspective redistribution. Nothing truly leaves, it just stops being distinguishable. Civilizations vanish not because they are fragile, but because distinction is fragile. Patterns dissolve, boundaries blur, context evaporates. Without context, even the most deliberate design becomes just another arrangement of matter. We tend to think of the Earth as something civilizations act upon, but in deep time, civilizations are something the Earth acts through. They are temporary configurations of its surface energy flows. When those configurations no longer hold, the energy finds another path. This is not failure, it is physics. An earlier civilization may have understood this, or it may not have. Either way, the outcome would be the same. The Earth does not reward understanding with preservation. It rewards alignment with duration. And duration favours processes that operate slowly and diffusely, not rapidly and concentratively. This may explain why the Earth feels ancient even when freshly altered, why new landscapes quickly feel old. The planet absorbs novelty fast, it smooths edges, it reduces contrast. What was once shocking becomes background. Our own cities will follow this path, cracks will widen, foundations will shift, vegetation will return, sediment will bury outlines. Given enough time, even the idea that something artificial existed there will fade. The Earth does not need to be violent to reclaim, it only needs to wait. When we ask if we are the first civilization, we are asking a question shaped by our own attachment to sequence. The Earth does not experience sequence the way we do. It experiences accumulation and release. It does not ask who came first, it asks what remains stable. From this viewpoint, the more meaningful question is not whether someone came before us, but whether we understand the medium we exist within. Whether we recognize that the ground beneath us is not passive, not inert, not an archive built for memory. The Earth is a process, not a container. This realization changes the emotional tone of the mystery. It replaces excitement with humility, curiosity with acceptance. The possibility of a prior civilization becomes less about hidden greatness and more about shared vulnerability. If others lived here before us, they were not erased unfairly. They were absorbed in the same way we will be. Their disappearance was not a punishment. It was a continuation. In this sense, Earth is not cruel. It is honest. It does not promise permanence and then withdraw it. It never promised it in the first place. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson beneath all of this. That intelligence is not defined by how long it lasts, but by how it experiences its moment. That meaning does not require endurance beyond memory. That awareness can be brief and still complete. In the end, Traveller, the Earth does not answer whether we were the first. It dissolves the urgency of the question. It reminds us that whatever has happened here has happened inside its patience, and whatever will happen next will do the same. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again, not from the stars or the past, but from the ground itself, steady and indifferent, carrying everything forward, whether it is remembered or not. A return does not mean going backward. It means circling close enough to the beginning that the distance between questions and answers starts to feel smaller. In deep time, returns happen constantly. Oceans return to basins they once filled. Ice returns to latitudes that once froze. Life returns to complexity after collapse, not because it remembers, but because conditions allow it again. When we speak of returning in the context of lost civilizations, we are not imagining survivors or revivals. We are describing a quiet emotion, attention turning back toward the ground, curiosity bending inward, the realization that the most important evidence may not be ahead of us, but beneath us, woven into processes we already study for other reasons. Science itself moves in returns. Ideas dismissed come back with new data. Anomalies ignored resurface when tools improve. Questions once considered unproductive become central when frameworks shift. The return is not repetition. It is refinement. If an earlier civilization existed, the only way we would ever approach its shadow is indirectly, not by hunting ruins, but by revisiting assumptions, by asking whether our definitions of intelligence, technology, and impact are too narrow, by returning to data sets we already have and reading them with a different humility. This kind of return requires patience. It is slower than discovery, less dramatic than revelation. It asks us to accept that some answers may never resolve cleanly, and that progress sometimes means learning how to sit with uncertainty without trying to fill it. I have felt this many times sitting alone after midnight screens glowing softly, old samples catalogued and recatalogued, knowing that whatever I am looking for may already be in front of me, but not labelled in a way I know how to see. The return is not about finding something new. It is about learning to look differently at what we already have. Civilizations return too, in a sense. Not as continuity, but as convergence. Similar solutions arise under similar constraints. Agriculture emerges where climates stabilise. Social structures form where resources can be stored. Tools appear where hands and minds align. These returns do not require memory. They require conditions. If intelligence has arisen more than once on this planet, it likely followed familiar pathways. The same physics, the same chemistry, the same pressures. From the outside, those pathways would look indistinguishable. The return would be visible only as repetition without reference. This makes the idea of return strangely comforting. It suggests that intelligence is not an anomaly but a tendency, not guaranteed but not singular, a possibility that reappears when matter organizes itself just so. But returns are never exact. Each iteration differs, context changes, background conditions shift. A civilization returning to awareness after a reset would not inherit the knowledge of what came before. It would start again, fresh and fragile, facing the same indifference from the planet and the same silence from the sky. This may already have happened, or it may be happening now, or it may happen again long after we are gone. When we return to the question of whether we were the first, it no longer feels urgent. The return reframes it. Firstness becomes less important than participation. We are part of a sequence that may have no memory of its previous steps, but still follows a recognizable rhythm. The Earth does not record attempts. It records outcomes, and outcomes return to baseline with remarkable consistency. There is a temptation to see this as bleak, to imagine awareness rising and falling without accumulation, without progress. But that assumes progress must be permanent to matter. In deep time, permanence is rare. Experience is not. A civilization does not need to be remembered to have been real. Its questions do not need to echo forever to have been meaningful. The return reminds us that value is not measured in endurance, but in presence. If something came before us, it asked questions under a different sky with different fears, different hopes. Its return to silence does not negate that moment. It completes it. And we too will return to soil, to chemistry, to background variation. Not as a tragedy, but as a process. The Earth does not waste complexity. It redistributes it. This understanding softens the mystery. It removes the need for revelation. The return is not about uncovering proof. It is about aligning perspective. Accepting that the universe does not operate on narrative satisfaction. When we return to the present moment with this in mind, our own civilization looks less like a pinnacle and more like a phase. Not insignificant, not doomed, simply situated within a much larger motion. The return invites care rather than certainty, attention rather than answers. It suggests that how we exist matters more than how long we last. In the end, traveller returning is not about the past. It is about orientation, about recognizing where we stand in relation to forces that do not center us but include us all the same. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again, and as we return to quiet, to rest, to the simple fact of being here now, that whisper is enough. Reflection begins when the noise of searching fades, and what remains is not an answer but a posture. It is the moment when curiosity relaxes its grip and becomes something gentler, something closer to listening. After all the layers we've moved through: stone, soil, sky, silence, we arrive not at a conclusion, but at a stillness that feels earned. To reflect on the possibility of earlier civilizations is not to chase proof anymore. It is to notice how the question itself has changed us. At first, it felt like a challenge to history, a disruption of timelines, a daring idea that promised revelation. But over time, the question softens. It stops asking who came first and begins asking what it means to exist at all on a planet that does not preserve intention. Reflection is where the scientist and the poet quietly agree. Both recognize that knowledge has edges it cannot cross without turning into belief. Both understand that uncertainty is not a failure state, but a boundary condition. The deeper we look into time, the more those boundaries define the landscape. If something intelligent came before us, reflection does not demand that we name it, describe it, or rescue it from obscurity. It asks us to consider what its disappearance says about the nature of persistence, about how memory works when the medium is not paper or stone, but a living, shifting planet. We often imagine the past as a place we could visit if only we had better tools. But the past is not intact anywhere. It is scattered, diluted, reused. Reflection reveals that even our own present will soon be like that, broken into signals stripped of narrative, interpreted only through indirect traces. This realization can feel unsettling, but it can also be grounding. It frees us from the burden of cosmic uniqueness. We do not have to be the first to matter. We do not have to be remembered forever to be real. In quiet moments, I think about how many nights humans have spent looking at the same sky, asking different versions of the same question. Where did we come from? What came before us? Will anything remain? Reflection reveals that these questions are not meant to resolve. They are meant to orient. What matters is not the answer, but the act of asking in a universe that does not respond in language. Reflection is the pause where we accept that silence is not emptiness. It is simply the absence of explanation. The idea of lost civilizations becomes less dramatic here. It no longer needs catastrophe or mystery to justify itself. It becomes almost inevitable. Given enough time, enough resets, enough erosion, intelligence will appear and disappear without leaving a clean outline. Reflection helps us see that this does not diminish intelligence. It contextualizes it. In this light, our own civilization is neither exceptional nor trivial. It is temporary in the same way a wave is temporary. Distinct, powerful, gone as soon as it finishes forming. The ocean does not grieve the wave, it absorbs it. Reflection also brings responsibility into focus. Not responsibility to preserve ourselves indefinitely, that was never possible, but responsibility to experience our moment with awareness, to understand that being here at all is unlikely, that consciousness is rare enough to deserve care even if it does not endure. If others came before us, reflection suggests they face the same quiet truth, that the universe does not offer guarantees, that meaning is local, that existence is brief but not pointless. The deeper reflection goes, the less it feels like loss. It feels more like continuity without memory, a sequence of awakenings separated by silence, each one complete in itself. And maybe that is the most peaceful interpretation. That intelligence is not a ladder with a top, but a rhythm. A pulse that emerges when conditions allow, fades when they don't, and leaves behind no obligation to be remembered. In the end, traveller reflection does not answer the question of whether we were the first. It releases us from needing to know. It invites us to rest inside the mystery without trying to own it. It's all right to not understand. Tonight, the universe whispers again, not with information, but with permission to stop digging, to stop proving, to simply be present in the brief luminous moment where awareness exists at all. The descent does not happen all at once. It begins subtly, like gravity increasing by a fraction you cannot feel, only notice after your thoughts start to slow. After reflection, after questions have softened, the mind naturally begins to loosen its grip. This is where inquiry yields to rest, where understanding steps aside and allows quiet to take its place. Descent into sleep is not an ending. It is a return to a deeper rhythm, one that predates language science and memory. Long before civilizations rose or fell, the planet already knew how to rest. Night is not an invention. It is a condition the Earth has always offered, a lowering of signals, a thinning of urgency. When we talk about lost civilizations, sleep becomes an unexpected parallel. Just as consciousness fades each night, entire cultures can fade from the record without drama. There is no announcement, no marker that says now it is gone. There is only the gradual quieting of activity, the redistribution of energy, the settling back into background processes. As you descend, notice how the question that once felt large no longer demands attention. Were we the first? Did someone come before these ideas drift now, not unresolved, but unweighted? They no longer pull at you. They float like sediment suspended in still water, slowly sinking. Sleep teaches what geology enforces. That awareness does not need to persist to have been real. That letting go is not failure. That cycles are not losses but continuations under different forms. I think often of nights spent in observatories or labs when the work pauses, not because it is finished, but because the body insists. Instruments hum quietly. Screens dim. Outside, the planet turns as it always has, carrying continents and oceans through darkness without instruction. Civilizations sleep too in a way. Activity slows, expansion halts, attention turns inward or dissipates entirely. What remains is not nothing. It is potential redistributed waiting for conditions to align again. As you descend further, the boundaries between ideas soften. Science no longer argues with myth. Data no longer competes with intuition. They coexist without friction. This is the state where understanding becomes unnecessary, where presence is enough. The Earth itself is always descending into sleep somewhere. Half the planet is in darkness at any given moment. Half is quieted, half is resting. This has been true for billions of years. Civilizations come and go entirely within that rhythm, never interrupting it. Your own breathing begins to mirror this planetary motion, in and out, rise and fall. A small oscillation nested inside much larger ones. There is comfort in this alignment, even if you do not consciously recognize it. If something intelligent existed before us, it slept too. Its individuals drifted into unconsciousness beneath unfamiliar skies. Their last thoughts dissolved into darkness just as gently as yours will tonight. Whatever knowledge they carried did not accompany them into sleep, and the world continued without it. This is not a tragedy, it is a symmetry. descent is where fear loses relevance. The unknown no longer threatens because the mind is no longer trying to control it. Questions release their tension. Mystery becomes a background texture rather than a problem to solve. As sleep approaches, the idea of permanence feels increasingly artificial. The need to be remembered fades. The need to know fades. What remains is sensation, without narrative awareness, without demand. The universe does not resist this. It accommodates it. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the default state toward which everything gently moves when energy is spent. You may notice fragments of imagery drifting through now. A shoreline smoothed by waves. A sky without constellations. Stone warming after sunset. These are not messages. They are residues of attention releasing itself. Descent is where the difference between past and future dissolves. There is only now thinning. The moment stretches, then loosens. Time becomes less linear, more like depth. Civilizations too eventually descend into this depth. Not erased violently, but layered over. Covered gently. Forgotten without malice. Their traces do not vanish instantly. They blur, then blend, then lose distinction, until they are no longer separate enough to name. As your thoughts slow, notice how effort disappears. You're not trying to sleep. You're allowing sleep. This is the same difference between forcing preservation and accepting impermanence. Nothing is required of you now. Not understanding. Not belief. Not resolution. The descent is complete simply by letting it happen. In this space, the universe does not ask who came first. It does not ask what remains. It only continues carrying everything forward in forms that do not announce themselves. Sleep is not an absence of awareness. It is awareness without edges. In the end, traveller descent is not a fall. It is a settling, a return to the deeper current that has always carried minds, worlds, and questions alike. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Sleep now. The cosmos will keep watch. The final moment is not a conclusion, but a soft widening of perspective where questions no longer press forward and answers no longer matter. This is where the story loosens its hold and becomes atmosphere instead of argument, a quiet field you can rest inside without effort or expectation. Nothing new is introduced here. Everything that needed to be said has already settled into place. At this point, the idea of a first civilization feels almost irrelevant. The Earth has turned so many times, carried so many forms, and absorbed so many endings that sequence itself loses meaning. First and last are human measurements, not planetary ones. From the view of deep time, all civilizations exist briefly, glow faintly, and then blend back into background processes. If someone came before us, they are not waiting to be rediscovered. They are not hidden behind a door we simply haven't opened yet. They are already everywhere, diffused into soil, water, air, and stone, indistinguishable from everything else that has lived and changed. Their story is not missing, it has simply lost its outline. And if no one came before us, that knowledge changes nothing essential either. Our presence would still be temporary, our questions would still be small against the age of the planet, our disappearance would still be absorbed without ceremony. Meaning does not come from uniqueness. It comes from awareness while it lasts. The final understanding is not a revelation, but an easing, the sense that the universe does not require us to solve it in order to belong within it. We are not auditors of existence. We are participants briefly conscious inside a much larger motion that neither resists nor accommodates our narratives. Civilizations are not chapters in a book. They are ripples in a fluid medium overlapping, interfering, cancelling, reinforcing, then smoothing out. The Earth does not bookmark them. It does not return to reread them. It carries on, carrying everything with it without preference. When you look at it this way, the fear of being forgotten dissolves. Forgetting is not erasure, it is integration. What disappears from record does not disappear from reality. It simply stops being singled out. It becomes part of the whole again. This is why the question of lost civilizations ultimately turns inward. It is not about what existed millions of years ago. It is about how we relate to impermanence now, whether we resist it, fear it, or learn to move with it gently, like a current instead of against it. I've spent long nights thinking about this, staring at chart simulations layered models of time that compress epochs into thin bands of colour. The more you compress time, the quieter everything becomes. Drama vanishes, events flatten. What remains is rhythm. That rhythm does not privilege intelligence, it does not reward complexity. It simply continues, and yet inside that indifference awareness keeps appearing. Minds keep waking up. Questions keep forming. Curiosity keeps returning even when answers do not. Perhaps that is the most enduring pattern of all. Not structures or tools or records, but the repeated emergence of wonder itself. A tendency of matter under certain conditions to look back at the universe and ask what it is. If someone came before us, they asked that question too. If no one did, then we are asking it for the first time. Either way, the act is the same. Awareness blooms, briefly looks outward, then fades without complaint. This is not a tragic arc. It is a complete one. Nothing is missing from it. Nothing needs to be added. The expectation that something should last forever is a misunderstanding of how existence operates. As this story ends, notice how little is being asked of you. There is no conclusion to agree with, no belief to adopt, no mystery to resolve before sleep. There is only the quiet recognition that you are here now aware and that this is already enough. The universe does not measure significance the way we do. It does not rank moments by their duration. A thought that lasts a second is no less real than a mountain that lasts 1,000,000 years. Reality does not require permanence to justify itself, so rest with that. Let the question of who came before dissolve into the background where it belongs. Let the pressure to know lift. Let the story become still. There is a quiet dignity in this realization. It does not shrink humanity or elevate it. It places us correctly suspended between vast scales, neither central nor insignificant. We are one expression of a planet learning itself one moment, where chemistry arranged itself into questions instead of silence. That alone is remarkable, even if it leaves no trace. When future layers form above us, they will not know our names. They may not even know our shape, but they will carry the consequences of what we altered, just as we carry the residues of what came before. In that way, continuity does not require memory. It requires only cause and effect gently unfolding across time. You can feel this now as the story settles. The sense that nothing urgent remains unresolved. The thought that even if the universe never explains itself, it is still deeply coherent. Order does not depend on understanding. It depends on persistence. And so, the final movement is simple. Not an answer, not a warning, not a revelation. Just permission to rest inside uncertainty without fear, to let curiosity soften into quiet and to allow sleep to arrive naturally as it always has, long before anyone wondered who came first. Nothing more is required tonight here. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. Not an ending, but a quiet threshold where the questions loosen their grip and the echoes settle back into the dark. We moved gently through buried layers and distant epochs, through hints and absences, and arrived here without answers and without needing them. The universe continues on its patient course. The past remains unfinished. Silence still keeps its own counsel. What we touched tonight was not proof, but perspective, a sense of scale that makes room for wonder without fear. In that scale, our smallness feels honest, even comforting. We are brief, yes, but briefly aware, and that matters. Science and story meet here where entropy softens memory and gravity holds longing in place. Time keeps folding, consciousness keeps flickering, and meaning doesn't demand resolution to be real. Some truths don't ask to be solved, only to be held lightly for a moment. If there were minds before us, they passed this way too, looking up, listening, then letting go. If there were none, the night is no less vast, the mystery no less kind. Either way, the lantern dims, the chamber grows still, and the chronicle rests, its pages pressed shut, not sealed. So rest now. Let the questions sleep beside you. Stay curious if you wish, but let curiosity soften into quiet. The universe will keep watch. And if this story found you tonight, you're welcome to linger here in the hush, where nothing needs to be certain to be true. And as the quiet deepens, remember that every ending is only a pause in a much longer rhythm. The Earth will continue its slow turning the stars, their distant burning, and time its gentle erasure of sharp edges. You don't have to follow any of it tonight. Simply drift, knowing that wonder does not disappear when you close your eyes. It waits, it breathes, it remains. Rest well, traveller.